Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us today. My name is Walter Pasquarelli, Tech and Society Manager at Economist Impact. And I would like to express a warm welcome to this virtual event, Empowering Businesses for Tomorrow, Decoding the Digital Future in the UK. It's the first event in our series on the digital future of businesses. What does it mean to be future ready? As part of my role, I've spent a large part of my career trying to understand how technology is changing business and society. Some 5 years ago, we observed that digitization efforts were seen as an important area of business strategy, a competitive advantage if we want, but really fundamental, practical digital transformation wasn't always at the top of businesses' agenda. But then, as it so often happens, unexpected events can occur in life. And in 2020, COVID-19 fundamentally changed the business landscape. As the first findings started to emerge how the pandemic was changing the social and economic fabrics of society, there was actually one insight that came up over and over again. And that was the centrality of digitization for companies that thrive during the pandemic. So today, very different from how it was 5 years ago, digitization is not only a competitive advantage, but it is a vital prerequisite for business success. In today's discussion, I want to go even a step further in understanding not only why, but really how businesses are using technology as part of their vision of the future. These circumstances are what set the context for today's webinar. I would like to thank our sponsor, Wipro Limited, for making today's discussion possible, as well as our fantastic set of panelists that are here today. So joining us, we have Onkar Nisal, Managing Director, UK and Ireland of Wipro Limited, Jan Tippin, Group Chief People and Transformation Officer at NatWest Group, Nora Senior, Past President of the British Chambers of Commerce and Board Member of the International Chamber of Commerce, and Sijo Joseph, Chief Technology and Information Officer at Mighty. Today's webinar will be divided in three parts. In the first, our panelists will tell us about how the COVID-19 pandemic changed their vision about the future. In the second part, our panelists will share their experience as to how they integrated digital technologies to stay competitive in the age of COVID. And in the final part of our discussion, we will hear about what it takes for businesses to prepare for the future. So without further ado, let's get started. Omkar, how has the pandemic changed the way that businesses think about the future? In your opinion, has future readiness become a greater priority?
Good morning, Walter. Absolutely. I think with the pandemic hitting us over the last 2 years, organizations globally have been very deeply focusing on two things. One is how do they, become a lot more resilient so that they can handle such events in the future. And second is in terms of a significant amount of thought into what does it mean for the organizations to be future ready. Organizations need to really look at what does it mean in terms of their business priorities, a lot more focus on business change. And I am very happy to see that a significant number of businesses have really taken this as an opportunity to really transform themselves very clearly, Walter.
Thank you very much, Onkar. I would like to get to some of these points later on during our discussion. And the same question really goes to Nora now. So how has the pandemic changed this way that businesses think about the future?
Well, first of all, I think that the pandemic has really put a focus in on communication technologies. So businesses have had to become more communication ready. And the quality and the type of communications hardware, if you like, is also improving. So I think that there will be a greater reliance on doing business over or using new technologies, particularly some sectors like retail and distribution. E-commerce was always, or in the past decade, has been on the rise. But particularly during the pandemic, retailing and distribution sectors really changed towards a different model of business. And I think that that is an area that we will see even greater movement within. So when you talk about future ready, I think that businesses will become much more risk ready, looking at what are the unforeseens that are coming down the road and how can they be prepared much better than they have perhaps in the past.
Thank you very much, Nora. And Sijo.
Walter, at Mighty, our journey to future readiness started 5 years back when the FM sector in UK was going through a very rough patch. Now, those who don't know Mighty, Mighty is UK's leading facility management company. We have 75,000 colleagues with 149 nationalities, with over 60,000 frontline heroes keeping our customers and their facilities efficient, clean, and secure. As a people business, around 5 years back, the survival option in front of Mighty was to reinvent ourselves, and technology became one of the core pillars of our strategy for the next 4 years. The current pandemic became a reinforcement of the strategy we adopted many years back, and which is to enable the science of service in a people business through technology. So, Walter, we were forced to think our future much before the pandemic, and pandemic just became a proof point of our investments into technology.
That sounds incredibly interesting. I'd like to touch on that later on during the discussion. And Jan, how has this experience been for you? How has the pandemic changed how your company has been sort of conceiving the future and preparing itself for it?
Well, thank you, Walter, and it's a great opportunity to be with the panel here today and talk about this topic. NatWest Group, we're a large organisation. We have 17 million customers, banking customers in the UK, and we bank more than and support more than 1 in 4 businesses in this country. So it's clearly incredibly important for us to have been there for our customers during the pandemic. I think rather like Sijo was saying, the trends that we saw during the pandemic have really accelerated trends that we had seen previously, particularly as far as digital technology has been concerned and the use of that in banking. The shift to digital, I think, has been even more pronounced in the last 2 years, with many organizations becoming digital only as opposed to digital also. And we've seen, great changes in customer behavior. About 80% of our customers are now digitally active. With us, we have now over 8.5 million mobile users. The percentage of sales that we now see through digital is nearly 90%. These trends have opened up, I would say, new channels for customers to engage with us in. At the beginning of the pandemic, we were seeing probably a few hundred video calls with our customers per week. I would say regularly now we top 15,000 plus. So new channels, new ways of engaging with customers, new behaviors and new requirements, I think, for businesses to really be there and support customers for the future.
Thank you. That's an incredibly interesting point, and especially thinking about how these changes had in fact already started prior to the pandemic is something that I think really explains as well how COVID-19 has transformed businesses. It hasn't really been something that potentially changed the strategy landscape altogether, but it's just something that made these existing strategies already more pronounced. And one point that I think is incredibly interesting is, Nora, you mentioned that just before about communication technologies becoming really one of the key trends, sort of like shaping the business landscape of tomorrow. Is this how have communications technology sort of played this part in shaping in changing your view about the business landscape of tomorrow? How have they been integrated in your company in the past few years?
So one of the things that Chambers of Commerce, International Chambers of Commerce focuses in on is trade. And I mentioned the fact about goods and services now being moved electronically much more frequently than perhaps when we would visit the high street and walk into a retail outlet. And I think that it's important to remember that digital trade is not just about, it's all of trade. It's not just about e-commerce. So it has to be embedded within every aspect, just as my colleagues on the panel have articulated how it's embedded within their business. But the challenge around that is that because we've all come to communication technologies in the digital environment all together, if you like, there are no legal systems, which really, there is no commonality of trade agreements or legal systems around operating in the ether of digital. So that is a challenge for us going forward. And I think that that there is a lack of alignment both across legal systems. There's a lack of international digital standards that will impact on how we trade across the internet. And there's a lack of coordination across public and private and government sectors to establish those common rules and standards. So I think there are challenges around what's going to be happening in the future in terms of operating in a digital environment.
That's fascinating. And my final question before we move on to the next section is to Sijo. One of the interesting points you just made is that at Mighty the pandemic had become a proof point for some of the previous strategies that you had implemented. So as you said, the becoming future readiness isn't something that just started in 2020, but it is something that sort of was started long ago in the years prior to the pandemic already. And what are sort of the now as we look forward, what are some of these strategies that you implemented? How have you become sort of, how have you prepared yourself so that when the pandemic started, you felt that, well, the strategies we've implemented have proven to be important and crucial?
Fantastic. Just to set the scene, Walter, as I said 5 years back, the FM sector generally in UK were going through as a rough patch, as I said earlier. We know some of the big brands completely disappeared from the UK sectors at all. So one thing important for us at that point of time was we had to invest in technology, and that became very obvious for us. The reason for that being, we are a very low margin business. We don't make much margin on the businesses which we do. So the cost of serve needs to reduce and the efficiency needs to become more focal point for us. So what we done was we come up with a 5-pillar strategy around the technology itself, saying that we will be cloud first. We move everything into cloud. We consolidate and bring all the systems together and the common processes together. We will be cyber ready. So on these strategies, what we done in 2019 was we moved all our IT core systems into cloud. We don't have any physical data centers anymore. We moved everything into cloud. Then what we done is we started connecting these systems through API. So people quite a lot now talk about API strategy, and we have to do it. We had no choice. We have to connect up the systems so that we get the straight through processing between the systems happening. And where we could not connect up the systems, we used RPA, robotic process automation, to enable more efficiency in our back office processes. The other investment which we done massively was on data lake. So we started streaming all the operational data and the sensor technologies which we deploy at our client side in real time into our data lake. Now, what does it enable us is we remove the need of a data warehouse completely. So we start reporting real time from our data lake solution. Then we started setting up connected workspace technology strategy, which means we started deploying sensors in our client side. If you look at right now through our technical service operations center in Manchester, we remotely monitor 53,000 assets connecting 380 sites. 8 million data points are processed every day, and it is growing. Through our global security operations center at Northampton, we remotely monitor security incidents of our client sites in real time. And throughout the pandemic, we also set it up a modern lab, cleaning and hygiene center of excellence in Birmingham, exploring robotic technologies for cleaning, for deep clean premises and keep the environment safe from pathogens. And as you can see that the efficiency we are bringing through technology, we had no choice. We had to do it for our own survival. And there is a funny story I always tell people when they speak about technologies. 2 years back, before the pandemic, I was struggling to roll out Office 365 to everybody. I was trying to tell them, look, we are moving all your data into the cloud. You should get everything on the cloud. You should be using Teams. Massive sessions we were conducting through our partners, Wipro and Microsoft, to go to the workforces, 60,000 workforces, and telling them, use Teams. And on an average, we were getting some 50% success. Some will move into that and some won't. Throughout the pandemic, overnight, we were all cloud ready. We were all Teams ready. As Nora mentioned, the communication became the core pillar. I mean, that's the only way the business could survive. And we could see that the proof point where people suddenly start using technologies.
Yeah, I think that's a fascinating point, and I think in part this brings us also to the next section, which is precisely about how businesses can harness digital technologies. And I think one of the interesting points that you already just mentioned, Sijo, is which relates to my next question as well, um, that technology became almost like a matter of survival, right? So not only a facilitator, but really a necessity in this pandemic. And now that you shared your thoughts, I'll be interested to hear also, like for Jen, like what has been the role of the digital technologies in helping your business navigate this disruption, particularly caused through the pandemic?
Well, I think it's brought significant new opportunities to engage with our customers. I mean, firstly, similar to CJO, we've absolutely, again, with a number of our partners, done a huge amount of work on cloud, on APIs, on integrated journeys. Our investment plan, for example, about 80% of our investment is now going into digital and technology-led transformation, particularly in data and analytics, which is one of the things I reflect on is that the pace of digital transformation in banking has been very, very significant, particularly over the last 2 years, when we've seen digital adoption probably increased 5 years in the space of 12 months or 24 months. But at the same time, I think it's also encouraged us to think about how we engage with our customers, how we still make those interactions personal, believable, empathetic, how are we there for our customers when they most need it, when they need advice. And so the marrying, I think, of digital technologies, using data, using AI, but also bringing in the power of that human interaction is something that I think is really important for our customers. And I would say particularly over the last couple of years, which has been very hard for many businesses, has been very, very hard for many households. Customers have wanted that personal touch, and what technology has given us is the opportunity, as Nora was saying, to engage and communicate in a different way with our customers. The example that I think will continue to grow in relevance this year is the use of social media, for example, to engage with customers. Now about 25% of shoppers in the UK actively use social media to discover new products and services. TikTok, for example, has got 21 million active users in this country, and most of those users, about 40% of them, are younger than 24. So, this is a very different way of engaging with customers, and it's helped us think about how we reach and support those audiences, whether that's through our marketing, our branding, the engagement, for example, of TikTok influencers in helping us think about what is our business strategy for the youth segment, for students, etc. So I really think that digital technologies, but married, as I say, with that personal touch, with that interaction with our customers, is really the way forward.
That's incredibly interesting. And Onkar, what has been the role of digital technologies been at Wipro during the pandemic?
So Walter, as you heard from both Sijo and Jen, businesses have taken a very, very strong technology-led response to the entire pandemic situation. Obviously, as a very strong global technology and consulting firm, we have looked at it from three different perspectives. So one is how do we enable organizations like NatWest and Mighty and others in terms of enabling them from the perspective of the entire customer journey definition. That's an important part of how businesses have taken the opportunity to really rethink their businesses interaction with their own clients as a very important part of this journey. Second, and probably the most phenomenal aspect of this entire transformation is the whole emergence of cloud. As a significantly big vehicle of change for technology change within organizations. We have seen a big uplift in terms of the cloud adoption. As an organization, we have invested close to $1 billion in our Wipro Full Stride services, which bring together the entire aspects of cloud services for organizations across the globe, so that we can really provide the right level of ecosystem approach, working with the cloud providers, but also understanding the enterprise and see how they can be married together. And I think the third most important part I would say is in terms of the talent. Any such large change within the industry requires a significantly different set of skilled professionals to drive this change. And obviously, I mean, it's not been something that we have been able to pivot very quickly. But I think it's a big journey for all of us. A journey that we as a technology company and organizations with whom we work with have actually joined hands in terms of how do we collectively make that big shift in terms of talent happen. For us, one is on the skill set side, but also we have started adopting new ways like crowdsourcing for talent. We have a very large global platform called Topcoder with 1.6 million members, and we are seeing organizations adopting some of these newer mechanisms of tapping talent globally. So, Walter, in a nutshell, these are the three big things we as an organizations are really focusing on to support the big transformation that we are seeing within the industry.
Thank you very much. And Nora, I know you've been mentioned already communications technologies and this sort of larger vision about becoming future readiness and integrating technologies. But what other technologies can you think of that potentially has helped you in these past years navigate disruption? What do you think have been sort of the main technological raw materials that have helped you navigate the past years?
Well, regulation is an area that, in terms of, as I mentioned before, digital trade, one of the key challenges around or for the UK will be, first of all, mass adoption and digital transformation. Persuading businesses, as we've said before, to invest in upgrading their software and their hardware so that they are able to look at more transactions over an interoperable system. But it's the adoption of those systems and those standards across all government and private sector systems that is going to be the big prize, if you like. If we can be more efficient, international chambers have looked at a calculation where we can increase trade by about £225 billion. There would be an 80% reduction in trade transaction costs. So I think that there is a bigger goal there in terms of investing in looking at how we can work together across borders, across geographies, to reduce the whole regulatory environment and free up the conditions against which businesses can trade and open up the opportunities that new systems will put to us. So the bigger goal is looking at having some kind of consensus across standard bodies to meet standards across the whole system.
Great. Excellent. I think the insights that you have provided are incredibly interesting and provide us with a really great jumping point for the next questions of this section. And one of the points that I was particularly curious to hear is, I know, Sijo, that you have mentioned um, a couple of really interesting elements of how technology has been able to help you out in the past years. You mentioned, for example, the shift from physical data storages to clouds. You mentioned data lakes, um, and other changes that you have made in the past that really prepared you for this disruption. And now, if we look at sort of the next years, so moving on from where we are today, moving on from this pandemic, what role do digital technologies will play in preparing you for the future? Are you foreseeing increased digitization still? Do you think that we're sort of going to this digital transformation is going to slow down, or what do you think is going to happen in the next years?
So, Walter, if I start with what technology enabled Mighty to do, I'll start with that point and I'll get into the what future is looking for many businesses. So, because of the technology investment we did, Mighty became stronger as a business. And right in the middle of the pandemic, and I say right in the middle of the pandemic, we acquired one of the big FM companies in UK, Intercell FM, and integrated successfully into Mighty throughout the pandemic within 1 year. And that was feasible only due to the technology scale we have. And you could see, if now you look at globally around the businesses, you could see that the companies who are ready with the technologies, they are doing more and more M&A. They're going and looking out and they're buying businesses and they're integrating because the technology is the enabler for them to do that. And Jen made a very interesting point early on in the discussion. It's not about we are digital also. It is about we are digital. I mean, that's the statement most of the companies are making and have to make. Now, when I look at around the businesses and around in the FM sector itself, flexible working, remote working is the norm. It is going to stay. And those who work in the technologies from last 20, 25 years, like Wipro and Omkar, remote working, global working was a norm for us, the technologists. But it was not open in front of the many businesses. Now everybody is adopting it because it's a survival mode for everybody. Now, within FM sector, and also Jen and Nora will and Omkar will say that office spaces are now looked completely different. Our portfolio of private and public sectors, they are looking at the office spaces completely different. The factories and supermarkets we look after, they need more efficient monitoring and flow management. The private offices are getting more into collaboration spaces and meeting up spaces. And employee well-being is the core of almost all the businesses. So we have got an AI-enabled employee app called Aria, which we developed a few years back, and it is much more in demand. A few years back, we were trying to push that technology to our clients. Now it's more like a pull because they want that so that they know what the utilization of their space, they know how the employee well-being is done. Digitalization of the workplace. Most of the companies are looking to improve the utilization of the space. As I said, the user experience is taking a center stage. Now, if I summarize, and again, environment, people remain the core of our agenda and many businesses' agenda as well. If I summarize, Walter, the technology was considered as an enabler, and with pandemic, we can see now the technology is going to become a disruptor, a differentiator, and a growth propeller to almost all the businesses. Either you are in it or you're out of it and you will be gone. I mean, that's the way the future, in my view, is going to go.
That is incredibly interesting. And one of the points as well, and I would like to sort of bring the question now as well to Omkar. I think you've mentioned a number of really interesting points. For example, the change of to the future of work, general changes of strategies, and these I would like to touch them upon a little bit later, as I know that Jan has a couple of interesting points on this one as well. But something that I'm really interested as well, Omkar, in your experience with Wipro, what do you think? How can businesses decide sort of which investments to make in technology and when there's so many things going on at the moment, so many different opportunities? How do I pick the right one that is going to work for me and my business?
No, it's an absolutely valid question, Walter, and I'm sure a lot of businesses today have put in a lot of thinking into what this entire technology change means for them. I think there are two very key aspects that they need to look at. The first one is to keep the customer at the center of any of these changes. I think decision making with respect to what your customer within your business segment really needs is something that very clearly then defines the entire methodology and the thought process around the change that you want to do. It then also starts to make an impact in terms of the technologies that you need to adopt to really start making the impact for that customer segment. So, for example, if I were to just take the case of when Jen mentioned about her focus on data analytics, AI, they are very relevant in terms of the banking world with respect to how you can really identify the right set of services that you need to provide to your customers such that you continue to remain relevant but engage with them in the most meaningful way in today's environment. If you were to look at Mighty as a business, I mean, in my view, and Sijo and I have discussed this at length, it's a big property tech. So it's a use of a lot of IoT, AI associated to that. So in my view, Walter, the choice of technologies is a very important part with respect to how the customer needs to be serviced. And we as an organization are very closely working with many startups as well through our Wipro Ventures initiative to really see what's cutting edge out there that can be brought to businesses in the space of data analytics, AI, IoT, so that there can be a much more future ready solution and choices that organizations can make with respect to technology change.
Thank you, Omkar. I think that's a really fascinating point, and I think one thing that this highlights as well is sort of some of the investments that some companies have done, for example, in some capabilities. Like Mighty, for example, has provided, with Cijo has provided some really specific types of investments in developing some new capabilities, and especially, as you mentioned, Omkar, as well, the shift to cloud, the shift to IoT. In general, the shift from a physical to a non-physical capabilities that power the business of tomorrow. And something that I think, especially Jan as well, I know that you have been doing is not only the investment in sort of the technological capabilities per se, but also investments in internally, and for example, in employees and in people. As we know, right now we're going through the so-called Great Resignation, as they say, and it's quite important to invest sort of on the one hand in the well-being of employees, as well as sort of in making a work environment that is sort of attractive for employees. And so, my question to you is essentially, well, how can companies ensure that as they engage in this digital transformation, as they invest in technological capabilities and these raw materials, how can they ensure that they actually keep their employees still at the center, especially in this age of, say, remote working?
It's a great question, Walter. And there's my role is as the Chief People and Transformation Officer for the bank, and there's a logic to why we have combined our thinking on people and transformation, because exactly to your point, we recognize that technology is wonderful. And, as Cijo has been explaining, it's enabled, it's disrupted multiple sectors, it's given opportunities to engage with customers, to differentiate businesses, but that is all powered through people and through the capability and skills of the people that we work with. And so, just as important as our investment in digital is our investment in our people, not just in terms of how our people work, and absolutely in common with many other companies, we have adopted a hybrid way of working. About 87% of our colleagues work in a hybrid way. Choice and flexibility have been absolutely critical to that, and very much that framework that we've developed, and we call it Freedom in a Framework, in fact, has been very much developed with our employees in mind and in a test and learn fashion, so that, really because of the level of ambiguity and the unknown, we can move forward into this new way of working together with our people and find a way that works best to, get the best out of both flexibility, choice for our employees and our teams, but also continue to get the best out of skills and collaboration. So thinking about different ways of working has been really important, but just as important as well has been the investment we've made in skills. I think we recognize that skills continue to be a challenge for all industries, but none more so, I would say, than financial services. The Financial Services Skills Task Force published a report recently that said that the proportion of the workforce in financial services lacking full proficiency in the skills that we need for the future has increased by about a third between now and subsequent years, compared to a fall of around 20% for the whole economy. So we know we have a big skills gap, and that, I think, says to us that we need to make a commitment to our people to help them prepare for the future. For example, we make available to all of our colleagues the NatWest Academy, which has opportunities for colleagues to upskill themselves in digital data and tech. We have a data academy, which every colleague has got access to. This year, we will make a commitment that 10% of our employees' time can be spent on preparing skills for the future. But also, because we're a purpose-led business, we think that it's important to support our customers with that transition as well. So that academy, that investment in skills, we also make available to our customers, because we recognize that actually, there is a skills gap overall in the economy, and that many regions, for example, suffer, digital exclusion. And so we feel an obligation to help our customers with that journey.
Great. I think yeah, this is a fascinating point, and it brings us also to sort of the next section of our discussion, which is sort of the looking forward. So what's going to happen in the next years, now that sort of the investment landscape has changed, and now that the direction of businesses has changed as well. So we've now seen sort of a new increased investment in technologies, from clouds to IoT, but also internal investments in sort of making sure that employees are basically made sure that they are part of this transformation. And something that I'm really interested as well, and that question really goes to Nora, is as we're sort of looking to make these new changes and make these new investments and getting ready for the future, what are sort of the conditions, especially from a regulatory point of view, that needs to be put in place for business to being able to adapt these technologies? What kind of regulations can help us create environment where digital technologies and integration into the business can actually flourish and thrive?
So I mentioned before where we have open and interoperable regulations, where there is agreement around transactions and bills of exchange, so that they become less complicated, that they become more uniform, so that small businesses, for instance, who now have opportunities to trade in new markets, find it easier to get their goods and services overseas without a whole raft of paperwork, where everything can move online, and where there is commonality, so that there is not confusion about the different types of regulations across different geographies. So I think that it's the uniformity and the commonality that can come through discussion and consensus between governments, between banks, between other private and public sector organisations. If there can be agreement around bill of exchange, and in the UK, the bill will come to Parliament in May of this year, looking at the bills of exchange and looking at digital standards initiatives which will create that environment where businesses can have easier understanding to be able to trade in multiple markets. So I think that that's where the biggest opportunity is, and the biggest focus ought to be in terms of regulation. but not easy.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I think that is a really interesting point, and as well, sort of the the ease of sort of how these new conditions can be built up, and how an environment can be created which is conducive to the growth of digital technologies, and that really raises a question, I think, which is, well, um, to what extent can companies actually prepare for the future? Sort of how much is actually in their control? What are sort of the investments that need to be made today in order to be ready for tomorrow? And I know that, Omkar, I know that you'll be you're well positioned to answer this question. So I would really like to hear your thoughts on that. Sort of what are the possibilities of companies as they look into the future? How much can they actually um, how much can they prepare themselves for what's to come tomorrow?
So Walter, there are two or three aspects that we need to really look at in that context. As I mentioned earlier, obviously customer is at the center of any change, so that continues to drive a significant amount of decision making from a future perspective. But one of the key aspects that a lot of organizations need to look at is, as digital connectivity increases, the ability to remain resilient and a significant focus on cyber is a very big aspect of how organizations can continue to remain relevant from a future perspective. So while a lot of investments continue to happen with respect to digitization, customer journey redefinition, data, AI, and so on and so forth, I think a big part of being future ready is also being how are you protecting not only your business with respect to the entire cyber environment that we have got, but also the entire supply chain that exists that services your end customers. I mean, today, Alter, we are in a very interconnected ecosystem world, and as Jen also mentioned that there is a significant amount of work that has happened on the API technology. Open banking in UK is one of the most advanced. So there is a big ecosystem play where connected organizations, connected services provide a integrated service to a client. So in my view, Walter, while a lot of investments will continue to happen on the transformation journey, one of the big aspects of future readiness is around the entire cyber agenda. And I think that's one big area where joint effort in terms of the CISOs of various organizations in conjunction with the regulators plays a very big role in terms of creating the right ecosystem, the choice of technologies that need to be absolutely harnessed to really provide that kind of an environment, Walter. So in my view, that's a very important and integral part of being future ready.
Thank you very much. And so the final question that I wanted to ask as well, Sijo, before we move on to the closing statements of this section here, is, in your opinion, because I know you've been making a lot of investments in the past years, and as well in preparation for what was to come with the pandemic. So I'll be curious to hear, like, in your opinion, what does a future ready business look like? We've had investments in technology, but now, as Omkar mentioned as well, sort of keeping the business safe through cybersecurity is an exceptionally important aspect of it. So what unique characteristic do you think does a future-ready business possess?
Thanks, Walter. I start with what Jen said. The people-centric technology will take a bigger role. Coming back to ease of use, minimum touch points, businesses and our customers are already looking for positive overall outcomes from a people-centric point of view, not just reactive problem solving from us. Environment and people are core for most of the businesses and should be, and technology will underpin that. Now, coming very specific to Mighty, the way we are looking at the future is that touchless technologies will become more important. The augmented reality and virtual reality, edge computing will become more prominent players for us. We already launched a trial with engineers on remote assist and diagnostics with augmented reality devices. We are actually trialing it with our key clients. So we are already seeing that will be The reason why we set up the Technical Service Operations Center in Manchester is to enable that, because we have got, just like how you manage telco network through a SOC, we have got a ESOC where our engineers are managed from a remote facility when they are in the field. So that will become very prominent, and augmented reality will play a very prominent role. Now, as Omkar mentioned, cyber protection is absolutely key and the center for what our businesses do. Um, Omkar and Wipro is supporting us in our cyber protection through their SOC, their Security Operations Center. The more digitalization we do, the more we need to make sure that our data is protected and used ethically. The ethical nature of using the data is in everybody's agenda and everybody's mind, and that will come more and more prominent player. As Nora will mention, the regulation will kick in, and we need to make sure the data we collect, the more digitalization, the more data we collect, it is used and consumed ethically. This is the underpin changes which I would see in the next few years, and especially around the augmented reality and the use of data.
Thank you very much. And that's a really interesting point, especially about the augmented reality and virtual reality as sort of the next frontier, perhaps, of what's going to happen for businesses as the technology matures. And I think that really brings us as well to the closing statements for today's discussion. And I would like to start with Omkar. So, what trends do you expect to see in the next 5 years in terms of future readiness? Which direction do you think will businesses take as they're sort of preparing themselves for facing the challenges of tomorrow?
So, Walter, very clearly the trend in terms of customer centricity. One of the big aspects that I am also seeing from a future ready business is a very sustainable business. So, commitment to global sustainability is going to be a very important part of how organizations will define themselves for their customers. And I think, in context of everything that we have spoken today, I would definitely want to add the fact that sustainability and commitment to sustainability as an organization, as an ecosystem, and as a customer is going to play a very big part of future ready businesses. Commitment to net zero. In fact, we were having some very interesting conversations with a couple of CIOs the other day with respect to how do you create code that is more sustainable so that it consumes less processing power and hence is a lot more environment friendly. So in my view, Walter, in addition to the key aspects that we spoke today, sustainability will definitely play a big role in terms of the agenda for future ready businesses, apart from the conversation we had around cloud, data, cybersecurity, AI, and others.
Great, yeah, that's fascinating. And Nora, the same question goes to you. We've now touched upon as well sort of the sustainability angle, and in addition to sort of the technological investments and customer centricity. What are, in your opinion, from your perspective, what trends are you expecting to see in the next 5 years?
Greater use of data analytics, examining where there are growth markets. We have an aging population in the West, but we have sub-Saharan Africa where in the next 30 years, there's going to be 50 billion people or a billion people, who are under the age of 25. So that changes market shifts and it changes different opportunities. I think that those companies that want to be future ready are going to look at the structure of their boards so that they have a strategy and a plan which aligns with different market opportunities on a global basis. I think that there needs to be inclusion in terms of executive accountability and responsible for looking at investment and the implementation of any strategic plan. So digital expertise embedded in the board is really important, and not all companies have that at the moment, particularly small and medium-sized companies. And the board has to be able to understand when it should invest and how it should invest. I think also that those companies that are future ready will have closer ties with colleges and universities, so they'll be more aware of the opportunities in terms of new innovation that are coming down the line, and being able to embed that within their business, whether it's automation, whether it's Internet of Things, but forward-looking companies and having the ability to be able to predict, as well as using data analytics to explore new products and services for the customers that they have both today and tomorrow, for me, are what makes a future-ready business in the digital age.
Thank you very much, Nora. And Sijo, same question to you. Which direction will businesses take in the future? What do you expect to see sort of in the next 5 years?
Thanks, Walter. The way I see it, the environment, planet-friendly, energy-efficient, smart workplaces, people-centric technologies, underpinned by a cyber protection, underpinned by the ethical use of data, as Nora mentioned, the data insight, and all in real time. And I think that's where we will see in the next 5 years, because the big agenda for everybody's mind will be how we use technology to look after our own planet, because we have got a problem here and we need to be a environment friendly and a planet friendly technology, because we all will be a technology company, because that's what pandemic given us. So I think that's where I would see the next 5 years will be. Of course, there will be lots of technical jargons like AR, VR, edge computing, but underpinning that, it's forward-looking companies will be thinking about environments and planet-friendly use cases.
Great. Excellent. Thanks, Sijo. And before we move on to a couple of questions from the audience, I would also still like to hear Jan's thoughts on this. Jan, you mentioned a few points, incredibly interesting about sort of the future of work. And related to this, what trends do you expect to see in the next 5 years?
And I think my fellow members of the panel have already talked about, huge number of trends, and I agree with all of them. The focus on digital data tech resilience, as we've been speaking about through this panel, the need to prepare our people for the future, investment in skills and talent. I agree completely, Omkar, with what you were saying around sustainability and the need for companies to not just prepare themselves, but also help lead the way in the transition to a low carbon economy. That's incredibly important. I suppose one of the trends we haven't spoken about is how much I think customers value trust and purpose and authenticity in businesses, particularly I suppose on the back of the pandemic, but also, the pace of digital change, the pace of technology change, I think has left people craving that sense of authenticity, that sense of, human interaction, and purpose will be very, very important, I think, to both how consumers think about which businesses they buy from, but also employees, which companies they choose to work for and how long they choose to work for. So that sense of purpose, culture, values, I think are incredibly important. And, I think what all of this tells me is that leadership in a digitally disrupted world is going to be even harder. We're asking our leaders to be able to lead teams through this ambiguity, through this level of disruption, through the pace of change. And in order to do that, I think what's most important is that future-ready businesses, yes, put the investment into skills and capabilities and technology, but also into curiosity and a willingness to listen and learn.
Great. Thank you very much, everyone. These have been incredibly interesting insights. And I'm sure as well that our audience will find them incredibly useful. And in fact, we do have some questions from the audience actually that I would like to pose to the panelists here. And the first one, and I think Omkar, you might be very well positioned to answer this question, is specifically when we talk about the main barriers to digital adoption. We have mentioned now a bit of the sort of the enabling environment with regulation. We have mentioned some of the investments that need to be made. But what are the main barriers to digital adoption for well-established organizations, and especially those that have significant legacies across people, processes, as well as technologies? What's your opinion on that?
So I think taking on from what Jen was mentioning, I think culture, mindset, is one of the biggest aspects that organizations grapple with. So while there is a significant advancement in terms of technology investment, the options and choices available, I think for organizations to pivot themselves in terms of being able to one, adopt it and then deploy it with respect to their own customers and markets. There is a big culture shift internally in organizations that need to be done. And I think that's I wouldn't say that's necessarily a barrier per se, but it's an important aspect where there is a big people change agenda that needs to be implemented, so that a lot of this can then be creatively intertwined and put out to the customers in terms of adoption of technology. So in my view, that's one of the biggest aspects that organizations will grapple with. Second, obviously, I spoke about very clearly in terms of the whole focus on cyber, because that's an absolutely critical element of digital economy that needs to be always handled in the most proper way. So, Walter, those would be my two key top points to mention.
Thank you very much. A second question we have here as well, which I think is really interesting. We've spoken a lot about sort of general digitization, but something which is quite interesting as well is one member from the audience here asked is, how can SMEs with limited resources start their digitization journey as well and keep their momentum going? I know, Sijo, I would love to hear your thoughts on this particular question here. How for smaller companies like SMEs that really want to embark on the same journey that I know, like for example, Mighty has been doing in the past few years. What is your advice on this? What's the best way to approach this for a smaller company as well?
I think, in my opinion, Walter, we are not I mean, even if you look at Mighty, we use technology to enable our businesses, but we are not a technology company, though we are now getting into more like a prop tech area. So my very simple equation when I bring the technology teams together is the ecosystems of the partners. That's critical for us because we don't do it together. We will reach out to the ecosystems of partners, like whether it is Wipro, whether it is Microsoft, who knows what is the best way to adopt, or who are bringing quite a lot of innovations into the market. And my simple advice will be, don't do it yourself. There are best in breed products there, much financially viable products out there. Speak to the experts and help them in your journey. Don't try to do it yourself. You need to set up your strategy. You need to have a vision, and then let the experts help you in that journey.
Great, thank you so much. I think this is a really interesting point as well. The outsourcing of sort of the digitization. It is not something that needs to happen in-house all the time, especially if you have limited resources, time, and especially expertise as well. And I think we have one more minute actually to address a third question from the audience before we wrap up. And I know this one here is as well one that we touched upon, but I think it really drives the main point home that I think Jen was trying to make earlier. And that is, as we sort of move into the future, and I know we've talked a lot about sort of investments into your own people, investments into the well-being, and making sure that employees want to stay at a company. Jen, this question here is particularly interesting. It says, how should businesses rethink their talent strategy so that they have the people that they need for their future roadmap? Could you maybe think of two to three key points that you think really need to be the businesses really need to ace in order to keep their most valuable employees?
Yeah, of course. I mean, I think a couple of quick points from me. I think the first is what I would encourage businesses to do is really think about the future. So what are the future skills and capabilities going to need to be over the next 5 years? Then work back and understand what that means for your requirements now. What does it mean for the people that you hire? What does it mean for the culture and values that you espouse and try to build on in the company? Not just in terms of ways of working, but collaboration, performance management, the whole culture and ethics of running a business. I think the other key area is investing in people for the future, skills, capabilities, but also thinking about reskilling. I mean, something that we've piloted quite successfully over the last 12 months is recognizing that, for example, in our branch network, the types and roles are changing very significantly. We've piloted a complete reskilling of some colleagues from those types of roles into, for example, software engineering, which many people may think is completely impossible, but actually it is possible with the right level of investment and support. So future skills, future capabilities, but also thinking about supporting your colleagues, the culture and values that you set, and investing in reskilling your teams.
Thank you so much. I think this is a really great point as well for closing off our discussion. I think really I would first of all like to thank the panelists for making this discussion here incredibly lively and incredibly insightful. Some of the key highlights really from this discussion, I think, is as Omkar mentioned and explained, there is really a general really the shift towards digitization is really in full swing. We've seen the transition to IoT and to cloud is not a theory anymore, but it has really become a reality that started in the years leading to the pandemic, and now is really something that has become a transition that needs to happen for businesses in order to stay relevant in the digital age. But similarly, as Sijo mentioned as well, another key point that I think has really stuck in my mind really is the fact that even as this digitization continues, new technologies will come to the surface that will transform the business landscape even more. And some of these are, for example, augmented and virtual reality, which also bring up the question of how much could actually businesses, especially smaller companies, do by themselves, and how much should they outsource to experts. And finally, as well as Jen mentioned, the question of talent remains as important as it has ever been. As employees receive more and more opportunities provided by remote work, it is key that in order to maintain their talent, they set in place the right kinds of talent strategy. They invest in reskilling, and they make sure that employees have a choice of flexibility for the environment that they work in. And all of this should then finally, as Nora said, really brought home with the right regulation environment that allows these kinds of technologies to flourish, but also to be adopted by businesses in a trustworthy manner. I would like to thank again all the speakers for joining today's discussions. Especially, I would like to thank Wipro for sponsoring today's webinar. And finally, thank you very much as well to the audience for tuning in and for providing these incredibly interesting questions. I would like to invite the audience as well to check out the other two events in our series. So please head over to events.economist.com to find about register for free about the other webinars in our series about future readiness. So thank you very much, and I wish you all a wonderful day.